Canine Haunting. The bitter chill of financial hardship had been gnawing at me for several months now. A constant companion I couldn't shake. My bank account dwindled with each passing week, forcing me to take up DoorDash deliveries after my regular job, anything to keep myself afloat in this merciless economy. It was during these late-night delivery runs that I began encountering things that defied explanation, phenomena that lingered in my mind long after, like shadows that refused to dissipate even in the brightest light. The incident I'm about to share still causes my hands to tremble when I recall it. Even now, months later, the memory remains as vivid as if it happened yesterday. Tuesday night. The digital clock on my dashboard read 9:37 p.m., a time when most families were settling in for the night. But my workday was far from over. My phone pinged with a notification, a substantial order from the Mexican restaurant I'd come to know well over these past months. The order was impressive. $75 worth of food with a $25 tip already added. In my world of struggling paycheck to paycheck, this was a blessing. The delivery address would take me about 15 minutes outside town limits, deeper into the countryside than I typically ventured, but the compensation made it worth the journey. The restaurant staff had the order ready when I arrived. My app displayed an estimated delivery time of 10:15 p.m. I mentally calculated the route as I carried the warm, fragrant bags to my car, the enticing aroma of spices filling the vehicle as I placed them carefully on the passenger seat. The initial segment of my drive was unremarkable. Familiar county roads with the occasional passing car. But as I turned onto the customer's road, darkness enveloped everything. The narrow passage was flanked by dense woods on both sides, with branches that seemed to reach toward my vehicle like gnarled fingers. No streetlights pierced this darkness. My headlights carved the only path forward, illuminating just enough road ahead to navigate safely. Google Maps informed me I had approximately 4 miles remaining when it happened. A spectral blur of white materialized in my headlights. A dog, but not just any breed. This was a Borzoi, those elegant Russian hunting dogs with the distinctive elongated snout. I would later confirm this after hours of anxious internet searching. My reaction was instinctive, foot slamming the brake pedal, tires screeching against asphalt. Despite my effort, I felt the sickening impact, not forceful enough to be fatal, but definite contact. My stomach twisted into knots as I pulled over, hands already shaking as I fumbled with the door handle. As an animal lover, the very thought of harming a dog filled me with profound dread. The beam of my flashlight swept frantically across the road's surface and into the adjacent ditches. Nothing. No injured animal. No blood. Not even a single tuft of fur clinging to my bumper. The road was completely vacant, as though nothing had crossed my path. But I had felt the impact, not imagined it, not dreamed it. My body knew the difference between nearly hitting something and making contact. I checked my watch. 9:55 p.m. Still on schedule for the delivery. With a deep breath that did little to calm my nerves, I continued toward my destination. The customer's residence was situated at the terminus of a long, winding driveway. Their porch lights cast a warm glow that somehow seemed out of place amid the encompassing darkness. The transaction itself was ordinary. The customer, a middle-aged man with a friendly demeanor, thanked me for venturing so far from town, accepted his order, and bid me good night. At 10:20 p.m., I began my return journey, taking the same route back toward civilization. As I approached the approximate location of the earlier incident, I instinctively eased off the accelerator. That's when I saw it again. Unmistakably the same canine. Same breed, same size, standing motionless in the middle of the road, its white coat gleaming under my headlights, like freshly fallen snow. This time I stopped completely, maintaining a distance of about 30 feet. My hands gripped the steering wheel, with such force that my knuckles blanched white. The dog remained stationary, its eyes reflecting my headlights, with an eerie amber luminescence. I engaged the high beams, half expecting the animal to flee from the sudden brightness. It didn't move a muscle. What possessed me to exit my vehicle in that moment? I'll never fully understand. Perhaps lingering guilt, concern that the animal might be injured from our earlier encounter, or simple human curiosity. Whatever the reason, I found myself standing on that desolate road, the engine still humming behind me. The dog maintained its position until I took a step forward. Then, with fluid grace, it disappeared into the dense forest bordering the road. I sighed, partly relieved yet strangely disappointed. The animal's well-being still concerned me, but at least it could move without any apparent difficulty. As I turned back toward my car, my blood crystallized in my veins. Between me and my vehicle stood 6 white Borzoi dogs, arranged in a perfect line with mathematical precision, each one identical to the others, each one completely silent, each one staring directly at me with unwavering focus. Imagine the scene: complete darkness surrounding you, save for the dim glow of your car's headlights, the impenetrable forest on either side, and these 6 spectral creatures blocking your only escape route. Their spacing was uniform, as though measured with scientific precision, too perfect to be natural. Not a sound emanated from them. No panting, no soft padding of paws against asphalt, no rustling as they adjusted their position, just silence so profound, it seemed to create a vacuum that consumed all ambient forest noise. I remained frozen, afraid that any movement might trigger a response. Time stretched endlessly in that standoff, seconds feeling like hours, as we regarded each other across that moonlit road. Then, without warning, all 6 lunged toward me simultaneously, their elegant forms transforming into something feral and ferocious. Their mouths gaped open, revealing rows of gleaming teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. I released a primal scream that tore through the night, my arms flying up instinctively to shield my face from the imminent attack. But the impact never came. When I finally lowered my arms and forced my eyes open, the road was empty. No dogs, no evidence they had ever been there. Just my car, its engine still running, and the oppressive silence of the forest surrounding me. I bolted toward my vehicle, but found the doors locked. My car's automatic security system had engaged when I exited with the key fob in my pocket. As I frantically fumbled to retrieve my keys, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of multiple sets of paws pounding against asphalt, at full sprint, closing in rapidly from behind. Simultaneously, an overwhelming odor assaulted my senses, the distinctive smell of wet canine fur, but with an underlying mustiness that reminded me of something long untouched, like an abandoned cellar. It was suffocating in its intensity, seemingly everywhere at once. My trembling fingers finally pressed the unlock button. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and engaging the locks in one frenzied motion. Whirling around to look through the rear window, I saw nothing. Empty road stretched behind me, bathed in the red glow of my taillights. I drove away with my foot pressing the accelerator to the floor, heart thundering in my chest. Every few seconds, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror, expecting to see those spectral creatures giving chase. But nothing followed me back to town. Upon reaching home, I inspected my vehicle meticulously. No damage, no fur, no evidence whatsoever of what I'd experienced. My clock read 10:45 p.m. The entire ordeal had consumed barely an hour of actual time, though it felt like an eternity had passed. Throughout the night, I attempted to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps exhaustion had conjured hallucinations. Maybe the stress of financial hardship had manifested as a waking nightmare. But deep down, I knew those dogs weren't natural. Their synchronized movements, their perfect spacing, their silent appearances and disappearances, these weren't the behaviors of living creatures. Call me delusional if you must, but I encountered something supernatural on that lonely road. Spirits taking canine form, perhaps. Phantoms with a purpose I couldn't comprehend. 2 weeks passed before I received another order from the same customer. The generous tip, $30 this time, glowed enticingly on my screen. My finger hovered over the accept button as conflicting emotions warred within me. Financial need battled against primal fear. Need won out,
though not without compromise. I promised myself that regardless of what I might encounter, I would remain safely inside my locked vehicle. The journey to the customer's house proved uneventful, almost disappointingly ordinary. No ghostly apparitions materialized in my headlights. No eerie sensations accompanied me through the darkness. I passed the location of my previous encounter with vigilant attention, scarcely blinking, but found only empty pavement. The delivery itself proceeded without incident. The same friendly customer greeted me at his door. Perhaps it was the lingering unease from my previous visit, or maybe it was genuine curiosity, but words spilled from me before I could reconsider. "Is this road haunted?" I blurted, immediately regretting the unprofessional query. Rather than responding with confusion or mockery, the man's expression softened with understanding. "You saw the Schaefer dogs," he stated, his tone devoid of question. He proceeded to share the tale of Margaret Schaefer, an elderly woman who had lived in the area during the 1970s. Her property connected to this very road, though the access path had long since surrendered to vegetation and time. She bred Borzoi dogs with meticulous dedication, showing particular preference for ones with pure white coats, and always maintained exactly 6 in her care. One harsh winter, concerns arose when neighbors hadn't seen Margaret for an extended period. When authorities finally conducted a welfare check, they discovered a scene that defied explanation. Margaret had passed away inside her locked home. Her 6 beloved Borzoi lay dead beside her. The investigation determined she had been deceased for several weeks, while the dogs had perished more recently from dehydration. "The strangest part," my customer continued, his voice lowering, as if sharing a secret, "is that despite being trapped with her body for weeks while they were still alive, and presumably starving, not one of those dogs had touched her. Not a single bite mark. They simply remained by her side until their own deaths." I asked if he'd ever experienced anything unusual on the road himself. His expression became guarded as he replied, "There's a reason I order delivery when I need food after dark. Since that night, I've made several more deliveries along that road without incident. Yet an uneasy feeling persists whenever I traverse that particular stretch of road. The memory remains vivid. Those 6 spectral Borzoi, standing between me and safety. Their synchronized movements, their silent vigil. Perhaps they're still there, guarding something I cannot comprehend. Or perhaps they're searching for something, a mistress long gone, a home that no longer exists, or a purpose that transcends the boundary between life and death."
The man on Trail 23. The bitter aftermath of divorce had left me financially and emotionally depleted. After discovering my wife's months-long affair with her physical therapist, our marriage disintegrated rapidly, dissolving into acrimony and resentment. I won't pretend I was blameless. The excessive drinking and explosive temper certainly didn't help salvage what was already broken. When Montana Fish and Wildlife offered me a position with substantially better compensation than my Idaho assignment provided, I seized the opportunity without hesitation. The decision wasn't just about the money. It represented escape, distance, a fresh start away from the wreckage of my previous life. My father often remarked that I should have followed the family tradition and gone into construction like him and my brothers. Steady work, good pay, he'd say, with a mixture of pride and exasperation. But I could never envision myself building structures designed for human habitation. Being a game warden resonated with something fundamental in my character, the conviction that I was safeguarding something irreplaceable, something pure. The Montana position included accommodations, a small cabin nestled within the management area. After months of reluctant dependence on my brother's hospitality in Boise, sleeping on his couch while listening to the muffled sounds of his happy marriage through the walls, the modest dwelling felt like palatial luxury despite its obvious flaws. The hot water proved unreliable at best, and the roof transformed into a percussive instrument during rainstorms. But the profound isolation served as balm to my wounded spirit. By autumn, signs of recovery had begun to manifest. The divorce papers bore both our signatures. The house keys resided with their rightful owner. Her and my alcohol consumption had decreased dramatically, from a daily six-pack to a weekly indulgence. Then came the night that fractured my tenuous equilibrium and cast me back into uncertainty. Wednesday, I'd spent the entire day mediating a contentious dispute with a local rancher, convinced that wolves were decimating his livestock. The evidence clearly indicated feral dogs as the culprits, but the rancher remained entrenched in his conviction, dismissive of factual evidence. By the time I completed the associated documentation, twilight had surrendered to complete darkness, and all I desired was the sanctuary of my cabin. 2 weeks prior, we'd discovered disturbing anomalies throughout the area. Deer carcasses bearing signs of mutilation, inconsistent with predator behavior. The incisions displayed surgical precision, and specific anatomical components were missing, components that natural predators typically leave untouched. I'd been systematically investigating these sites, attempting to identify patterns or connections. That morning, I'd discovered 3 additional deer, arranged in a configuration that appeared deliberately orchestrated, as though positioned specifically for discovery. I'd collected samples and photographic evidence, intending to dispatch them to the state laboratory the following day. Trail 23 offered the most direct route back to my cabin, a dirt road that would reduce my journey by approximately 20 minutes compared to the paved highway alternative. My vehicle navigated the familiar imperfections in the road surface with practiced ease, as my thoughts drifted toward the leftover venison stew awaiting me in the refrigerator. The white pickup truck appeared ahead, partially pulled onto the shoulder, as though its driver had stopped momentarily. Earlier that week, several hikers had reported sightings of a similar vehicle parked in unusual locations throughout the management area. According to their accounts, the driver would remain stationary for extended periods, observing the trails through binoculars. Each time I investigated these reports, the vehicle had already departed. Under normal circumstances, I might have continued past without stopping. My shift had technically ended, fatigue weighed heavily upon me, and hot food beckoned. Yet something about this particular truck triggered internal warning signals that I couldn't ignore. Perhaps its immaculate condition seemed incongruous with the muddy surroundings, or maybe its positioning appeared too precisely calculated. The source of my unease remained elusive, but the sensation was undeniable. I positioned my vehicle behind the truck and retrieved my spotlight from the center console. The license plates indicated Montana registration, though not from our immediate vicinity. They originated from a county bordering North Dakota. Attempting to run the plates through dispatch would prove futile in this remote location, where radio reception was notoriously unreliable. Examining the truck's interior through the rear window revealed disturbingly barren conditions. The passenger compartment contained no seats, just exposed metal flooring scattered with assorted tools. Dark stains patterned the interior surfaces, their composition immediately apparent to someone with my professional experience. The dashboard supported sophisticated photographic equipment, a high-end camera with telephoto capabilities, positioned to capture exterior imagery. Beside it lay a stack of what appeared to be developed photographs. "Evening, friend," the voice materialized from the wooded area to my right, triggering an involuntary pivot that nearly dislodged the flashlight from my grasp. A tall, slender man stood among the trees, clad in flannel and denim, hands casually tucked into his pockets. His posture conveyed artificial nonchalance, a studied imitation of relaxed human behavior that failed to achieve its intended effect. The incongruity between his attempt at casual demeanor and the palpable tension emanating from him created an unsettling dissonance. "Having car trouble?" I inquired, though we both recognized the pretense underlying my question. His response came accompanied by a smile that inspired visceral revulsion, like witnessing a reptile attempting to mimic human expression without comprehending the underlying mechanics. "Not exactly. Just taking a break, admiring the scenery." At night, my hand instinctively migrated toward my sidearm. "Night's the best time to hunt,"
He advanced a single step, maintaining that grotesque approximation of a smile. "You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? Been watching you work. You're good at tracking, but you miss things, like those deer carcasses today. You checked the wrong spots." A glacial sensation traversed my spine. My investigation of the mutilated deer remained unreported. No one should have possessed that information. "Saw you taking pictures this morning," he continued, "but you didn't look inside them, did you? Didn't check what was missing, what was replaced." His statement struck with the force of physical impact. He was correct. I hadn't performed internal examinations of the carcasses, limiting my assessment to external documentation and sample collection. "How about you step into the light, where I can see you better?" I drew my weapon, maintaining it in a lowered position, but prepared for immediate use. He tilted his head at an angle, reminiscent of avian curiosity, rather than human interest. "You're different from the others, more aware. Most people just drive right past, never notice anything wrong, but you notice things. That's why I picked this spot, knew you'd stop. Others." The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Messes need cleaning up. That's what the truck is for. Makes disposal easier when you remove the seats." He paused, that horrific smile expanding to reveal teeth too uniform, too white. Though sometimes, they fit just fine in the bed. Professional training dictates specific protocols for such encounters, procedures designed to maintain control while minimizing risk. In that moment, however, instinct overrode training. I discharged a warning shot skyward, and commanded him to assume a prone position on the ground. His response manifested as laughter, a high-pitched wheezing sound utterly devoid of genuine mirth, before he retreated into the dense undergrowth with fluid movements that seemed to defy natural locomotion. Backup arrived promptly following my radio call. Our search of the vehicle revealed contents far more disturbing than mere bloodstains. Dozens of photographs littered the floor, surveillance images documenting not only wildlife within the management area, but also personnel. Wardens, rangers, hikers, all captured in candid moments, spanning months of observation. Laboratory analysis of the deer samples yielded results that defied rational explanation. The missing organs had been replaced with human tissue of indeterminate origin. Forensic experts could not identify the source, as the DNA matched no profiles in any available database. The prevailing theory suggested desecration of human remains, though we found no evidence of grave robberies or missing persons that aligned temporally with the incidents. The individual responsible remains unapprehended. His motives, identity, and current whereabouts continue to elude law enforcement efforts across multiple jurisdictions. What haunts me most persistently, however, is not the mutilated wildlife or the human tissue inexplicably integrated into their remains. It's the photograph I discovered among those scattered across the truck's floor, an image capturing me standing on the porch of my cabin, unaware of observation, in a moment I believed myself completely alone.
The Crawling Man. The year was 2016, and I found myself employed as a delivery driver for Domino's Pizza. The position wasn't glamorous, but it provided sufficient income to cover my basic expenses while pursuing my education. One particular evening shift altered my perception of reality in ways I'm still attempting to reconcile. The order seemed routine enough. 2 large pepperoni pizzas with an accompanying order of breadsticks. The delivery address was situated along one of those semi-rural roads that existed in the ambiguous territory between suburban development and genuine countryside. I recalled making previous deliveries to that general area, though not specifically to the house in question. The location proved relatively accessible, approximately 14 minutes from our establishment. Upon arrival, I observed a residence that appeared somewhat dated yet well-maintained. The porch light cast a welcoming glow, and a vehicle occupied the driveway, all indicators of an occupied household anticipating a food delivery. I retrieved the insulated bag containing their order and approached the entrance. My repeated knocks went unanswered, despite visible interior lighting. I attempted to contact the customer via the provided telephone number, but each call transferred directly to voicemail. Company protocol dictated a 5-minute waiting period, with subsequent contact attempts before departure. After adhering to this procedure without success, I decided to return to my vehicle. As I turned to descend the porch steps, my peripheral vision registered something that immediately halted my movement. A man occupied the back seat of my car. He was attired in formal clothing, reminiscent of church attendants: black suit, white dress shirt, conservative necktie. His physique was notably slender, almost emaciated, and I estimated his age to be approximately 40 years. But these details registered as secondary concerns, compared to his expression, a smile of such unnatural width and rigidity, that it immediately triggered profound discomfort. His eyes remained unblinking, fixed upon me with unwavering intensity. Indignation surfaced as my initial response. "Hey, get out of there," I called out, my voice sharper than intended due to the unexpected intrusion. The stranger maintained his position, utterly motionless, save for that fixed, unsettling smile. No acknowledgement of my command, not even the involuntary movement associated with respiration. Just that unwavering stare and frozen expression. I considered approaching the vehicle, but hesitated, uncertain of the man's intentions or potential response. Instead, I elected to contact law enforcement, explaining the situation while maintaining visual contact with my vehicle. During this communication, I momentarily averted my gaze. When I redirected my attention toward the car, the rear door stood open, and the back seat was vacant. The man had vanished in that brief interval. Disoriented, I scanned my surroundings, attempting to locate him. The explanation for his disappearance manifested through excruciating physical sensation, a sharp, penetrating pain in my left thigh. I cried out, instinctively recoiling, and nearly losing my balance. There on the ground before me was the stranger, positioned on all 4 limbs, like a quadrupedal animal. He had bitten my leg through the fabric of my jeans. Despite this aggressive action, he maintained that same unnerving smile, his gaze fixed upon me, with the same unwavering focus. No sound accompanied his movements, no labored breathing, no animalistic growling, nothing to indicate exertion or excitement. Just silence, and that eternal smile. I scrambled backward, creating distance between us before retreating to my vehicle. I started the engine immediately, then noticed with alarm that the rear door remained open. Reaching behind me, I grasped the door handle and pulled it shut, feeling something in my ribcage protest the awkward movement. As I prepared to depart, a troubling thought intruded. I had already contacted the authorities. Leaving the scene might constitute abandonment or obstruction, potentially resulting in professional consequences beyond the immediate situation. Financial circumstances didn't permit such risks. I couldn't afford potential fines or employment termination. This reasoning compelled me to remain, engine running, doors secured, awaiting official response. Through the window, I observed the strange man maintaining his quadrupedal posture, observing me with that fixed expression that had not altered since our first encounter. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness as this bizarre standoff continued. Eventually, he began to move again, still on all 4s. His locomotion defied natural movement patterns, jerky yet fluid simultaneously, suggesting practiced efficiency rather than desperation or disability. He proceeded around the perimeter of the house with surprising speed, disappearing from view without once assuming a conventional upright human posture. I never saw him again after that moment. Law enforcement arrived shortly thereafter, their vehicle lights illuminating the property as they recorded my statement. One officer remained with me, while others investigated both my vehicle and the surrounding area. Their search yielded no trace of the peculiar intruder. More disturbing was their discovery that all doors to my vehicle were now unlocked, despite my absolute certainty
of having engaged the locking mechanism. The officers provided escort back to my residence and documented the incident thoroughly, subsequently investigating the property where the encounter occurred. They discovered no occupants at the delivery address, raising further questions about the original order and its purpose. I required a week's absence from work to recover both physically and psychologically from the ordeal. The physical wounds eventually healed, but the sense of vulnerability and uncertainty has proven more persistent. When people experience traumatic events, they often fixate on specific elements that might seem peripheral to outside observers. For me, that fixation manifests as an inability to drive after sunset. The darkness that once represented nothing more threatening than reduced visibility now harbors potential ambush, deception, and horror. My trust in solitary nighttime travel has been irrevocably damaged. Every shadowy roadside figure, every unexplained movement triggers the memory of that unnaturally smiling man and his inhuman movements. I share this account not merely as a cautionary tale, but as a desperate attempt to process an encounter that defies conventional explanation. If there's any wisdom to be gleaned from my experience, it's simply this: be vigilant in the darkness. What waits there might wear a human face, but that doesn't guarantee human nature or intention.
Stalked for approximately 3 years. I held what I considered an ideal position: night security at a corporate business park. The job's routine nature and relative solitude suited my temperament perfectly. However, this employment ultimately led to an encounter that continues to disturb my perception of reality. The business park featured 4 office buildings arranged in a quadrangle formation around a central parking facility. My responsibilities primarily involved hourly patrols between buildings, verifying secured access points, and identifying potential security concerns. Due to the substantial distance between structures, security personnel utilized vehicles rather than conducting foot patrols. The company provided white Ford Explorers emblazoned with the security company's insignia. My assigned shift extended from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., with standard patrol intervals at 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4 a.m. The incident occurred during my 2 a.m. patrol circuit. Atmospheric conditions that night were clear with moderate temperature, cool but not uncomfortably cold. The parking facility was approximately half occupied, as several tenant companies operated extended hours. I had just completed my inspection of Building C and was proceeding toward Building D, when peripheral movement between parked vehicles caught my attention. My initial assumption involved an employee perhaps heading to or from their shift. However, when I attempted to focus directly on the movement source, something immediately registered as abnormal. Whatever I had glimpsed possessed unusual height, significantly taller than average human proportions. I maneuvered my vehicle alongside that particular row of parked cars and deployed the spotlight, systematically illuminating the area. Nothing visible remained. I considered fatigue as a potential explanation. The 2 a.m. patrol consistently presented the greatest challenge to sustained alertness throughout my shift. As I resumed my patrol route, the rearview mirror captured additional movement. This second sighting provided greater clarity, and the image remains seared into my memory with disturbing precision: a figure resembling an animated stick drawing, bearing only a silhouette without definable features beyond its outline. The proportions appeared impossibly thin with elongated limbs. It navigated between vehicles with fluid yet unnatural grace. I halted the vehicle and rotated in my seat for improved visibility. The figure had vanished, but an acute sensation of observation descended upon me, the instinctive awareness of being watched, but intensified beyond any previous experience. Deciding to complete my assigned patrol, I proceeded toward Building D, while continuously monitoring my mirrors. The figure reappeared, now clearly following my vehicle. It utilized parked cars as concealment, but maintained pursuit. Its estimated height approached 8 feet, yet it moved with apparent weightlessness. The movement pattern proved most disturbing, not conventional bipedal locomotion, but something resembling gliding interrupted by sporadic jerky adjustments. The limb movements suggested additional articulation points beyond normal human anatomy, or perhaps complete absence of joint limitations. I increased my vehicle's speed while attempting to maintain professional composure. Internally, I attributed the experience to excessive caffeine consumption or sleep deprivation. This rationalization collapsed when the entity emerged directly into my headlight beam approximately 30 feet ahead. Applying the brakes forcefully, I observed the figure with horrifying clarity. It matched exactly my initial impression, a perfect stick figure silhouette, lacking any features or texture. Pure black against the illuminated background, its arms extended beyond its knees, and its head formed a perfect circle atop an elongated neck. For several seconds we remained in this configuration, myself paralyzed within the vehicle, the entity motionless in the roadway. When it advanced a single step toward me, I instinctively shifted into reverse. Upon returning my attention forward, the figure had vanished. I conducted a comprehensive visual survey of my surroundings, but detected nothing unusual. Just as I began to question my perception, movement recurred. Turning rapidly, I witnessed the entity ducking behind a parked van. Despite its attempt at concealment, the perfect circular head remained visible above the vehicle's roof, tilted at an angle suggesting continued observation of my position. I abandoned my intended inspection of Building D, though I refrained from reporting the incident. Professional pride prevented me from acknowledging fear of what essentially resembled an ambulatory doodle. During my return journey, the entity maintained intermittent visibility. It appeared between vehicles at irregular intervals, sometimes crouched with limbs folded in configurations reminiscent of arachnid posturing, other times at full extension, circular head oriented at unnatural angles. The profound silence accompanying these manifestations intensified their dreamlike quality. No footfalls, no movement sounds, nothing to anchor the experience in auditory reality. Approximately halfway to the main building, the entity intercepted my path again. As I watched, transfixed, it executed a transformation from crouched position to full extension. The unfolding movement continued beyond normal human height, eventually reaching an estimated 10 feet. I accelerated abruptly, maintaining maximum permissible speed, until reaching the main building. Upon arrival, the parking area appeared completely vacant. I completed my shift inside the facility, citing illness to my supervisor to explain the deviation from standard patrol protocol. For the remaining 4 hours of my shift, I maintained vigilant observation of the parking area through available windows, but observed no further anomalies. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., the property appeared entirely normal in the morning light. Throughout my continued employment at that location, I never again encountered the stick-like entity. Perhaps this represents the most implausible narrative you've encountered, challenging fundamental beliefs about perceived reality. I relate these events with complete conviction regarding their occurrence, though I acknowledge the possibility of physiological or psychological explanations, extreme fatigue, nutritional factors or similar mundane causes. Yet a persistent question remains. What if some entity exists in our shared reality that manifests as an impossibly proportioned, ambulatory stick figure? What would its purpose be, and why would it observe a solitary security officer during the darkest hours of night?
The rocking chair attack. As a real estate professional with over a decade of experience, I've encountered numerous unusual circumstances during property showings. However, the incident I'm about to relate transcends professional anomaly and enters the realm of genuine terror, an experience that fundamentally altered my relationship with darkness and solitude. The evening had begun routinely enough. I conducted a showing of a rural farmhouse property to a young couple seeking their first home.
The showing concluded without incident around 9 p.m. The clients expressed appreciation but displayed the telltale signs of continuing their search elsewhere. Such outcomes represent the standard reality of real estate work. My return journey required navigation of county roads characterized by minimal illumination and substantial distance between residential properties. Approximately 15 minutes into my drive, my headlights revealed an unexpected obstruction. A wooden rocking chair positioned directly in the roadway. The chair appeared to be a conventional porch rocker, unremarkable in design but entirely out of place in this setting. I stopped approximately 20 feet from the obstruction and activated my hazard lights. Traffic volume on this particular route was minimal, but professional responsibility dictated removing the potential hazard. I exited my vehicle, leaving the engine running for continued illumination. The doors automatically locked upon closing, a security feature of my newer model, using my phone's flashlight for additional visibility. I approached the chair. A distinct snapping sound emanated from the wooded area to my right, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under pressure. The noise originated approximately 20 yards from my position. Momentarily startled, I paused and directed my light toward the sound source. Before I could process this initial disturbance, another identical sound originated from the opposite side of the road. As I redirected my attention, multiple simultaneous sounds of movement became apparent from both wooded areas flanking the roadway, no longer isolated incidents, but coordinated activity. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. I was being surrounded. Dark-clothed figures emerged from the tree line, their faces obscured by ski masks. Several carried implements, one distinctly gripping what appeared to be an axe, others armed with various weapons I couldn't immediately identify. Their emergence continued until I counted approximately 7 individuals from the initial tree line. When I turned to retreat toward my vehicle, I discovered 2 additional masked figures had emerged behind me, effectively cutting off my escape route. My attempts to unlock the vehicle using the key fob proved futile, either due to distance or electronic malfunction. The figures began advancing with measured, deliberate pacing. Their synchronized movement suggested coordination and purpose rather than opportunistic threat. Fight being impossible against such numbers, flight remained my only option. I abandoned my vehicle and ran along the road, away from both the roadblock and the approaching figures. Their footsteps transitioned from walking to running in response, maintaining pursuit without verbal communication. The first residence I encountered appeared occupied. Interior lights suggested presence. I pounded desperately on the door while calling for assistance. No response came. With pursuers closing distance, I proceeded to the next illuminated home, repeating my desperate pleas for intervention. Again, no response. Somewhere between the second and third houses, practical considerations forced me to remove my heels. The cold pavement immediately damaged my unprotected feet, but survival necessity overrode physical discomfort. After the third unanswered attempt, I recognized the futility of this approach. The masked figures would overtake me if I continued this pattern. Scanning my surroundings, I identified a drainage ditch adjacent to the roadway, concealed by tall grass. Acting on desperate instinct, rather than calculated planning, I dove into this potential sanctuary. The concrete-lined ditch provided approximately 4 feet of depth, sufficient to conceal my presence if I remained motionless. I pressed my body against the cold concrete, attempting to regulate my breathing, despite overwhelming panic. The sounds of pursuit soon passed overhead, multiple sets of footsteps traversing the road mere feet above my position. I detected muffled speech, the first vocalization from any of my pursuers, but distance and the acoustic properties of my hiding place rendered the words unintelligible. The significance remained clear, however, these were not silent apparitions, but communicating human predators. Time passed with excruciating slowness. My feet throbbed from both impact injuries and exposure to the cold concrete.
Every ambient sound, passing vehicles, nocturnal wildlife, even the rustling of wind-disturbed foliage, triggered renewed terror. Eventually summoning tremendous courage, I cautiously elevated my position to survey the roadway. Empty. In the distance, the hazard lights of my abandoned vehicle continued their rhythmic flashing. With trembling hands, I retrieved my phone and contacted emergency services. Law enforcement arrived approximately 10 minutes later, 2 patrol vehicles with emergency lights activated. They assisted me from the drainage ditch and documented my statement. One officer remained with me, while others investigated both my vehicle and the surrounding area. Their search yielded disturbing results. The rocking chair had vanished without trace. My vehicle remained where I had abandoned it, engine still running, but contrary to my absolute certainty of the automatic locking system's engagement, all doors were now unlocked. This detail, seemingly minor in comparison to the overall experience, continues to disturb me profoundly. It suggests either mechanical failure at the most inopportune moment, or, more disturbingly, intentional tampering during my absence. The officers provided escort to my residence and filed a comprehensive report. Their subsequent investigation included contact with residents of the homes where I had sought assistance. Remarkably, all residences were confirmed unoccupied at the time of the incident, despite interior lighting suggesting otherwise. The statistical improbability of 3 consecutive homes being simultaneously vacant, despite appearances, raises questions I cannot answer. Law enforcement never identified the perpetrators. The absence of physical evidence, no recovered chair, no footprints suitable for documentation, no witnesses beyond myself, resulted in an unsolved case that gradually descended in priority for the department. I required a week's leave from professional duties to allow physical recovery and psychological processing. My feet healed relatively quickly, but the deeper wounds to my sense of security and perception of normalcy remain unresolved years later. The aftermath of such experiences often manifests in unexpected fixations or persistent fears. In my case, that fixation centers on nighttime driving. What once represented convenience or necessity has transformed into a source of profound anxiety. The anticipation of potential ambush, the vulnerability inherent in isolated travel after dark, and the fundamental mistrust of apparently empty landscapes now define my relationship with night. This account serves as both personal catharsis and cautionary narrative. The most mundane objects, a simple rocking chair, can become instruments of terror when deployed with malicious intent. Isolated roads harbor potential threats beyond mechanical failure or wildlife encounters. Most significantly, the boundaries between ordinary criminal threat and something potentially more inexplicable remain disturbingly permeable in certain circumstances. Exercise caution in darkness. Question unexpected obstacles, and perhaps most importantly, trust the instinct that whispers of wrongness, even when rational explanation isn't immediately apparent.
My early commute encounter. My professional responsibilities necessitate an unusually early commute, well before dawn regardless of season. The route traverses approximately 8 miles of rural backroads, winding through agricultural land and intermittent woodland before connecting to the main highway. During these pre-sunrise journeys, ambient darkness achieves a quality difficult to articulate, a profound absence of light that persists even beneath clear skies and full moon, due to the surrounding topography and vegetation. On most mornings, vehicular traffic remains nearly non-existent until reaching more populated areas. Encountering more than 2 other vehicles during the initial segment represents notable deviation from routine. This isolation generally proves welcome, an opportunity for reflection and mental preparation before engaging with professional demands. In March 2023, however, an experience during this solitary commute fundamentally altered my perception of darkness and isolation in ways that continue to influence my daily life. Winter conditions prevailed that particular morning, intensifying both the darkness and the sense of isolation. Intermittent fog had formed throughout the river valley, creating scattered areas of reduced visibility. Near my residence, these conditions presented minimal concern, merely occasional translucent patches that dissipated quickly. Approximately 5 miles into my journey, I noticed headlights behind me, not inherently unusual despite the early hour. The vehicle maintained considerable distance, demonstrating commendable road etiquette, in contrast to drivers who aggressively tailgate, despite hazardous conditions. Those intensely bright LED headlights that transform rearview mirrors into instruments of temporary blindness remained mercifully subdued by the distance between vehicles. As I navigated one of the route's more pronounced curves, I observed the headlights behind me had vanished. I assumed the other driver had diverted onto one of the intersecting side roads, a common occurrence given the rural network of interconnecting roads. Upon emerging from the curve, my headlights illuminated a figure standing alongside the roadway. Reflective material on their vest captured and intensified the light, identical to safety equipment worn by highway maintenance personnel. The presence of roadwork at this hour seemed improbable, but I reduced speed as a precautionary measure. No accompanying equipment or warning signs were visible in the vicinity. The figure stood with their back toward the roadway, completely motionless, despite the approaching vehicle. As I continued to decelerate, something about their posture registered as profoundly abnormal, a complete absence of the minor postural adjustments that typically accompany even stationary human positioning. Furthermore, most highway workers would acknowledge approaching traffic, particularly on narrow rural roads, where safety margins are minimal. This figure remained perfectly stationary until I approached within approximately 50 feet. What occurred next defies biological possibility. The figure's head rotated to face me, not a natural turning of the neck, but a complete 180-degree rotation, while the torso maintained its original orientation. This wasn't figurative or exaggerated description. The head physically rotated to face backward while the body remained positioned away from the road. The face revealed during this impossible movement appeared fundamentally wrong, proportions distorted, features stretched beyond anatomical possibility. The specifics resist precise description, but the wrongness registered immediately on a primal level of recognition. Instinctive fear triggered acceleration. In my rearview mirror, I observed the figure step directly onto the roadway, body still oriented away from me, but head remaining twisted to maintain visual contact as I departed. The fog had intensified in this area, rapidly obscuring visibility beyond short distances. The yellow centerline became increasingly difficult to discern through the thickening atmospheric conditions. When I checked my mirrors again, headlights emerged from the fog, identical to those observed earlier. The vehicle approached with erratic movement, weaving across lanes without apparent concern for road boundaries. Conventional wisdom might suggest pulling aside to allow safe passage for the approaching vehicle. An overwhelming intuitive certainty, however, indicated that stopping or reducing speed would result in severe consequences. Instead, I increased speed despite hazardous conditions. The straightaway permitted temporary acceleration to approximately 70 mph, significantly exceeding the posted 45 miles per hour limit. Without warning or apparent cause, the pursuing headlights vanished again, not gradually dimming or turning aside, but instantaneously disappearing from perception. Maintaining elevated speed, I divided attention between the road ahead and monitoring my mirrors. Through the advancing fog bank, approximately a quarter-mile ahead, another reflective vested figure appeared, positioned centrally in my travel lane with identical posture to the previous encounter. I executed a rapid lane change to avoid collision. As I passed, the figure's head performed the same anatomically impossible rotation to track my movement. This second encounter provided clearer visualization of the face,
mouth distended into an unnaturally wide grin containing too many teeth, eyes presenting as solid black voids rather than recognizable human organs. Self-preservation overrode traffic regulations, as I accelerated through a controlled intersection without reducing speed. Checking my mirrors once more, I observed the headlights reappear, now alarmingly close enough to illuminate my vehicle's interior with unnatural brightness. The section of roadway adjacent to the river presented particularly hazardous conditions, with fog density reducing visibility to approximately 20 feet. Something impacted my rear window with sufficient force to create a radiating fracture pattern. A scraping sound followed, reminiscent of fingernails drawn across metal surfaces. The following minutes exist in memory, as fragmentary impressions rather than coherent sequence. Fog-shrouded roadway, excessive speed, adrenaline-fueled focus on maintaining vehicle control. Upon reaching the highway intersection, I had achieved sufficient distance from the pursuing entity that its headlights no longer appeared in my mirrors. I diverted to a service station illuminated with industrial-grade lighting, and parked directly beneath the brightest area. Inspection revealed significant damage to my rear window, fracture patterns originating from one corner and extending across the glass. More disturbing were the marks surrounding the window, distinct scratches in the paint surface consistent with fingernail impressions, but deeper and more pronounced than human nails could reasonably produce. I remained at the service station until my physiological response stabilized. Other patrons appeared to register both the vehicle damage and my obvious distress, maintaining noticeable distance during their activities. Despite the encounter's duration and intensity, I arrived at work only minimally delayed, having traversed the affected roadway segment at speeds far exceeding safety recommendations. I attributed the incident to wildlife encounter when questioned by colleagues about my apparent distress. That evening I researched local news sources for reports of unusual activity or accidents, but found nothing relevant to my experience. For the subsequent week, I utilized an alternative route, despite the significant additional commute time. When I eventually resumed my standard route, I intentionally departed earlier than necessary, rationalizing that daylight would dispel both the physical darkness and the psychological residue of my encounter. That morning, however, I observed something that invalidated my attempted rationalization. Multiple trees along the specific road segment where my encounter occurred now displayed reflective tape at approximately chest height. These were not full safety vests, but rather simple strips of reflective material affixed to the trunks. I subsequently examined these locations during daylight hours, and discovered the tape had been removed without trace. No official roadwork or utility maintenance had been scheduled in that area during the relevant time frame. I've had no subsequent encounters with reflective vested figures or pursuing headlights along my commute route. Nevertheless, certain weather conditions, particularly fog or heavy precipitation that reduces visibility, trigger intense anxiety that persists throughout the journey. Rational explanation continues to elude me. The impossibility of the physical movements I witnessed suggests hallucinatory experience, yet the tangible vehicle damage confirms external interaction occurred. Whatever manifested on that rural road, whether human with elaborate deception or something defying conventional categorization, fundamentally altered my relationship with darkness, isolation, and the unwitnessed spaces between human habitation. 111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111111 At 22, I resided with my parents in a rural property while working at a fast food establishment to address accumulated college debt. Our residence occupied an isolated position, set back considerably from the nearest public road. The connecting driveway extended approximately half a mile through densely wooded terrain, a pleasant scenic approach during daylight hours that transformed into an intimidating corridor of darkness after sunset. A solitary lamppost remained from a former gate installation near the entrance, but this provided minimal illumination against the encompassing darkness. My employment schedule typically included closing shifts, necessitating return journeys between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. On the initial December night in question, I departed work at precisely 11:47 p.m., a time permanently etched in memory through subsequent events. Fatigue and workplace odors accompanied me as I navigated the familiar route home. Upon turning onto our driveway, my headlights briefly illuminated something that instantaneously altered my perception of safety. A pale figure, nearly white in coloration, moving with deliberate motion behind a tree. The movement occurred with such rapidity that detailed observation proved impossible. My initial rationalization suggested wildlife, perhaps a deer startled by approaching headlights, but the movement pattern contradicted typical cervid behavior. I stopped my vehicle and lowered the window, intending to confirm absence of hazard through auditory observation. The ensuing silence presented almost tangible quality. Complete absence of expected nocturnal forest sounds. No leaf movement, no small animal activity, no insect sounds penetrated the absolute stillness. After approximately 30 seconds of this unnatural quiet, I attributed the sighting to fatigue-induced misperception and continued homeward, though uneasiness persisted throughout the evening. 2 nights later, another closing shift placed me at the driveway entrance at approximately 11:45 p.m. The previous experience remained present in my thoughts, creating heightened awareness as I navigated the entrance. Near the same location, the pale figure reappeared, briefly visible, as it moved behind a different conifer with deliberate, purposeful movement, unlike typical wildlife behavior. Unable to dismiss this second occurrence as imagination, I exited the vehicle, with phone flashlight activated. The ambient temperature registered well below freezing, without accompanying wind. My exhaled breath created visible vapor clouds in the beam of light. I examined the area surrounding the sighting, but discovered no conventional evidence, no footprints or disturbance in the ground cover, no indication of recent passage. Despite the absence of physical evidence, an overwhelming sensation of wrongness permeated the location, an intense impression of being observed from multiple directions simultaneously. This indefinable sensation persisted despite rational attempts to dismiss it, ultimately compelling my return to the vehicle. Approximately 1 week later, following a particularly demanding Saturday shift that concluded at 12:20 a.m., the encounter escalated beyond dismissible perception. Driving along our driveway, my headlights illuminated a figure crouched directly in the roadway, no longer partially concealed or momentarily glimpsed, but fully visible and motionless. The entity appeared humanoid, in basic configuration, but with profound anatomical discrepancies. The limbs extended beyond proportional human parameters, and the posture defied conventional anatomical positioning. The skin presented a pallid white coloration that demonstrated unusual reflective properties when illuminated. Neither the matte appearance of human skin, nor the glossy quality of certain materials, but something undefined by standard visual reference. As my headlights illuminated this figure, it rotated to observe me with jerking, segmented movements suggestive of mechanical, rather than biological, operation. Then, defying all natural movement patterns, it transitioned from bipedal stance to quadrupedal configuration, with fluid continuity impossible for human physiology. The subsequent movement into adjacent woodland occurred with speed exceeding human capability, particularly considering the density of undergrowth and navigational complexity. In near total darkness, I remained stationary for an extended period, attempting to process the encounter through rational frameworks, but finding no satisfactory explanation. Upon eventually proceeding to our residence, I verified security of all potential access points with obsessive thoroughness. The following morning, I related the experience to my father, whose skepticism diminished upon observing my genuine distress. Our subsequent investigation of the area revealed only conventional deer tracks, no evidence supporting or explaining my observation. Subsequent closing shifts invariably included additional encounters of escalating intensity. On one occasion, the entity maintained position at the driveway entrance, standing fully erect, revealing height significantly exceeding at the driveway entrance, standing fully erect, revealing height significantly exceeding human norms. As with previous encounters, it transitioned to quadrupedal movement, with unsettling fluidity, before disappearing into the forest. Over successive weeks, the entity's behavior pattern evolved from passive observation to active engagement. It began pacing my vehicle, moving through densely wooded terrain parallel to the driveway, while maintaining speed equivalent to my driving pace of 25 to 30 miles per hour. This parallel tracking often continued, nearly to our residence, before the entity would withdraw. The most disturbing incident occurred mid-January, around 12:30 a.m. The entity crossed directly before my vehicle, its movement exhibiting fluid, but non-human characteristics, reminiscent of underwater motion, despite occurring in air. It then pursued my vehicle through the forest, visible in my rear-view mirror navigating between trees, with precision impossible. In near total darkness, the pursuit continued, until approximate visual range of our residence. Despite intensive property examination, we never discovered conclusive evidence supporting my experiences. No identifiable footprints, no territorial markings, no physical evidence differentiated from normal woodland activity. The entity appeared exclusively during nocturnal hours, specifically between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., and never manifested during daylight regardless of other conditions. The entity's movement pattern remains the most distinctive and disturbing characteristic in recollections. The transition between bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion occurred with seamless continuity, suggesting both configurations represented natural states, rather than adaptive positioning. No known terrestrial organism demonstrates such dual-mode capability, with equivalent facility in both configurations. I maintained employment at that establishment for an additional year, transitioning to daylight scheduling whenever possible, on occasions requiring late shifts. Traversing our driveway induced anticipatory dread regardless of whether the entity manifested visibly. Even years after these encounters, returning to my parents' residence triggers automatic scanning behavior, searching woodland boundaries for pale movement, or unusual configurations among the trees. Nocturnal sounds, occasionally, evoke memories of those encounters, initiating physiological stress responses despite temporal and geographical distance from the original events. Rational explanation continues to elude me. Conventional possibilities
undiagnosed human conditions, unfamiliar animal species, stress-induced hallucination. Each collapse under near animal species, stress-induced hallucination. Each collapse under scrutiny of specific observed characteristics. The entity's movement capabilities, appearance, behavior patterns, resist categorization within established, biological frameworks. What traverses woodland boundaries, during specific nocturnal layouts, capable of fluid transition between manifestancy and both, to lead manifestably, such benefits speed and navigational precision and complete darkness. The question remains unanswered, but sensitivity of encountering its answer continues. To inform my relationship with darkness, sense its locations, from the boundaries, between manifest, to manifest, the natural human inclination toward driving into nouns, to raise compromise, to performance, to race, to performance, to performing fight, to performing fight, to performing fight, to performance, 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 to performance ways, to performance weapons, to performance, to performance, to performance, to performance, to performance, to performance, to performance.
The rearview mirror has transformed from practical equipment into potential revelation of unwelcome truth. Perhaps most disturbing is the recognition that absolute certainty regarding what follows behind remains forever beyond our capacity, regardless of technological assistance or rational preparation.